brothers.
I have.
Someone had torn Leonardo's paintings from the walls and slashed them with a knife. From the darkness beyond, he could hear the sound of sobbing. A woman sobbing. His mother. He started to make his way towards the sound when a shadow moved behind him, something raised above its head. Ezio twisted round and seized a heavy silver candlestick which someone was bringing down on his head. He gave a savage wrench, and his attacker let go of the candlestick with a cry of alarm. He tossed the candlestick away, out of reach, grabbed the arm of his assailant, and pulled the person towards what light there was. There was murder in his heart, and already his dagger was out.
"Oh, Ser Ezio, it's you! Thank God!"
Ezio recognized the voice, and now the face of the family housekeeper, Annetta, a feisty countrywoman who'd been with the family for years. "What has happened?" he asked Annetta, taking both her wrists in his hands and almost shaking her in his anguish and panic.
"They came, the city guards. They've arrested your father and Federico. They even took little Petruccio. They tore him from your mother's arms."
"Where is my mother? Where is Claudia?"
"Here we are,"
came a shaky voice from the shadows. Claudia emerged, her mother leaning on her arm. Ezio righted a chair for his mother to sit on. In the dim light, he could see that Claudia was bleeding, her clothes dirty and torn. Maria did not acknowledge him. She sat on the chair, keening and rocking. In her hands, she clutched the little pearwood box of feathers Petruccio had given her not 2 days, a lifetime, before. "My God, Claudia, are you all right?" He looked at her, and anger flooded through him. "Did they?" "No, I'm all right. They roughed me up a little because they thought I could tell them where you were. But, Mother, oh, Ezio, they've taken Father and Federico and Petruccio to the Palazzo Vecchio." "Your mother's in shock," said Annetta. "When she resisted them, they—" She broke off. "Bastardi!" Ezio thought quickly. "It's not safe here. Is there somewhere you can take them, Annetta?" Yes, to my sisters. They'll be safe there." Annetta barely managed to get the words out, the fear and anguish choking her voice. "We must move fast. The guards will almost certainly come back for me. Claudia, Mother, there's no time to waste. Don't take anything. Just go with Annetta. Now, Claudia, let Mama lean on you." He escorted them out of their stricken home, still in shock himself, and helped them on their way, before leaving them in the capable hands of the loyal Annetta, who had begun to regain her composure. Ezio's mind raced with all the implications, his world rocked by the terrible turn of events. Desperately, he tried to assess all that had happened, and just what he must do now, what he must do to save his father and brothers. Straight away he knew that he had to find some way of seeing his father, finding out what had brought on this attack, this outrage to his family. But the Palazzo Vecchio. They'd have put his kinsman in the 2 small cells in the tower, of that he was sure. Maybe there'd be a chance, but the place was fortified like a castle keep. And there'd be a redoubtable guard placed on it, tonight of all nights. Forcing himself to be calm and to think clearly, he slipped through the streets to the Piazza della Signoria, hugging its walls and looking up. Torches burned from the battlements and from the top of the tower, illuminating the giant red fleur-de-lis that was the city's emblem, and the great clock at the tower's base. Higher up, squinting to see more clearly, Ezio thought he could discern the dim light of a taper in the small barred window near the top. There were guards posted outside the palazzo's great double doors, and more on the battlements, but there was none that Ezio could see at the top of the tower, whose battlements anyway were above the window he needed to reach. He skirted the square away from the palazzo, and found his way to the narrow street which led off the piazza along the palazzo's north side. Fortunately, there were still a reasonable number of people about, strolling and enjoying the evening air. It seemed to Ezio that he suddenly existed in another world from theirs, that he had been cut off from the society he had swum in like a fish until only 3 or 4 short hours ago. He bristled at the thought that life could still continue in its even routine for all these people, while that of his own family had been shattered. Again, he felt his heart swell with an almost overwhelming rush of anger and fear. But then he turned his mind firmly back to the work in hand, and a look of steel crossed his face. The wall rising above him was sheer and giddyingly high, but it was in darkness, and that would be to his advantage. Moreover, the stones of which the palazzo was constructed were rough-hewn, so he would have plenty of handholds and footholds to aid him in his ascent. One problem would be any guards posted on the north side battlements, but he'd have to deal with that when he came to it. He hoped that most would be grouped along the west-facing main facade of the building. Taking a breath and glancing round, there was no one else in this dark street. He gave a leap, took a firm hold of the wall, gripped with his toes in their soft leather boots, and began to scale upwards. Once he'd reached the battlements, he dropped to a crouch, the tendons in his calves straining with tension. There were 2 guards here, but they had their backs to him, looking towards the lighted square beneath. Ezio stayed motionless for a moment, until it became clear that any sound he'd made had not alerted them to his presence. Staying low, he darted towards them and then struck, drawing them back, one hand around each of their necks, using their own weight and the element of surprise to bring them down on their backs. In barely a heartbeat, he had their helmets off and smashed their heads together violently. They were unconscious before they could register any surprise on their faces. If that hadn't worked, Ezio knew he would have cut their throats without a second's hesitation. He paused again, breathing hard. Now for the tower. This was of more smoothly trimmed stone, and the going was hard. What was more, he had to climb round from the north to the west side of it, where the cell window was. He prayed that no one in the square or on the battlements would look up. He didn't fancy being brought down by a crossbow bolt after having got so far. The corner where the north and west walls met was hard and unpromising, and for a moment Ezio clung there, frozen, looking for a handhold that didn't seem to exist. He looked down and saw far beneath him one of the guards on the battlements looking up. He could see the pale face clearly. He could see the man's eyes. He pressed himself to the wall. In his dark clothing, he'd been as conspicuous as a cockroach on a white tablecloth, but inexplicably the man lowered his gaze and continued his patrol. Had he seen him? Had he not been able to believe what he'd seen? Ezio's throat thumped with the strain. Only able to relax after a long minute had passed, he breathed once more. After a monumental effort, he arrived at his goal, grateful for the narrow ledge on which he could just perch as he peered into the narrow cell beyond the window. God is merciful, he thought, as he recognized the figure of his father, his back turned towards him, apparently reading by the thin light of a taper. "Father," he called softly. Giovanni spun round. "Ezio, in God's name, how did you—" "Never mind, father." As Giovanni approached, Ezio could see that his hands were bloody and bruised, and his face pale and drawn. "My God, father, what have they done to you?" "I took a bit of a beating, but I'm all right. More importantly, what of your mother and sister?" "Safe now." "With Annetta?" "Yes." "God be praised." "What happened, father? Were you expecting this?" "Not as quickly as this. They arrested Federico and Petruccio, too. I think they're in the cell behind this one. If Lorenzo had been here, things would have been different. I should have taken precautions." "What are you talking about?" "There's no time for that now," Giovanni almost shouted. "Now, listen to me. You must get back to our house. There's a hidden door in my office. There's a chest concealed in a chamber beyond it. Take everything you find inside it. Do you hear? Everything. Much of it will seem strange to you, but all of it is important." "Yes, father." Ezio shifted his weight slightly, still clinging for dear life to the bars that crossed the window. He didn't dare look down now, and he didn't know how much longer he could remain motionless. "Among the contents you'll find a letter, and with it some documents. You must take them without delay, tonight, to Messer Alberti."
"The Gonfaloniere?"
"Exactly. Now, go."
"But, father—"
Ezio struggled to get the words out, and wishing that he could do more than just ferry documents, he stammered,
"Are the Pazzi behind this? I read the note from the carrier pigeon. It said—"
But then Giovanni hushed him. Ezio could hear the key turning in the lock of the cell door. "They're taking me for interrogation," said Giovanni grimly. "Get away before they discover you. My God, you're a brave boy. You'll be worthy of your destiny. Now, for the last time, go." Ezio edged himself off the ledge and clung to the wall out of sight as he heard his father being led away. He almost couldn't bear to listen. Then he steeled himself for the climb down. He knew that descents were almost always harder than ascents, but even in the last 48 hours he'd gained plenty of experience of scaling up and down buildings. And now he clambered down the tower, slipping once or twice, but regaining his hold, until he had reached the battlements again, where the 2 guardsmen still lay where he had left them. Another stroke of luck. He'd knocked their heads together as hard as he could, but if they'd chanced to regain consciousness while he was up on the tower and raised the alarm, well, the consequences didn't bear thinking about. Indeed, there was no time to think of such things. He swung himself over the battlements and peered down. Time was of the essence. If he could see something down below which might break his fall, he might dare to leap. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw the awning of a deserted stall attached to the wall far below. Should he risk it? If he succeeded, he'd gain a few precious minutes. If he failed, a broken leg would be the least of his problems. He would have to have faith in himself. He took a deep breath and dived into the darkness. From such a height, the awning collapsed under his weight, but it had been firmly secured and gave just enough resistance to break his fall. He was winded, and he'd have a few bruised ribs in the morning, but he was down, and no alarm had been raised. He shook himself and sped off in the direction of what only hours ago had been his home. When he reached it, he realized that in his haste, his father had neglected to tell him how to locate the secret door. Giulio would know. But where was Giulio now? Luckily, there had been no guards lurking in the vicinity of the house, and he'd been able to gain access unchallenged. He had stopped for a minute outside the house, almost unable to propel himself in through the darkness of the doorway. It seemed that the house had changed, its sanctity defiled. Again, Ezio had to collect his thoughts, knowing that his actions were critical. His family depended on him now. He pressed on into his family home, into the dark.
Ezio.